Hello, my name is Sarah Zedek, my pronouns are she, her, and this is a YouTube video about a cartoon movie for children. That's right, we're doing a BreadTube special. So recently I watched Puss in Boots and The Last Wish, and it was pretty good. I watched it because people said it was pretty good, and yeah, it's a pretty good movie. It's well animated, really fun in a lot of places. It does what it does as well as any movie for children could be expected to do under our current socioeconomic organization of society. I don't typically talk about children's media on this channel because while I do sometimes watch it, I think Steven Universe is pretty good. I don't know, I like some stuff. Generally, I find like trying to talk about the themes of media for kids to be a bit of a lost cause, especially when you're coming from the perspective of like being an adult talking to other adults. I don't know. I have mixed feelings about the exercise, but I want to talk about this one because I have a good opinion. There have been a lot of really great animated movies for children over the last like 5-10 years, I don't know, that especially post Spider-Verse have really embraced much more like traditionally animated looking styles, and everybody loves to put it on Spider-Verse. I think you could probably put this current sort of wave of really dynamic animation at least a little bit also on Arc System Works, who do like Guilty Gear and the Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball Fighter Z, and a bunch of other like fighting games that sort of proved that actually you can use 3D models in video games to create really authentically 2D looking animation. So it's not just that Spider-Verse came out and suddenly everybody remembered that you can make animation look good. Everybody is sort of sick of the way things have been. These things never are just one thing that comes out and then everybody changes everything about what they're doing. I don't know, I like a good kids movie as much as the next person, but they're kids movies. They're for kids, and that is what it is. I have been thinking recently that we look at media that's designed for children and we talk about the quality of children's media and we're like, it's for kids. What do you expect? Of course it's all garbage. You think maybe we should like interrogate that? Like maybe there should be some sort of like higher standards or perhaps a more stringent regulatory body in charge of maybe not letting there be propaganda for children. Anyway, even outside the realm of the recent, like really gorgeous animated movies, there's a lot of Pixar stuff and a lot of DreamWorks stuff over the last 10 years. Some of it is more well regarded, some of it is less well regarded. But through all of these animated movies, there's like one thread, one trope that really drives me up the wall, and that is the wacky side character. So you'll have your core cast, and they're the ones who are the prime movers of the plot. They're the ones who feel the stakes and engage with the narrative and drive it forward. You've got your protagonist and your antagonist and your secondaries, blah, 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 all the different characters. And then there is the wacky side character who is just sort of not really attached to anything. They're the comic relief character. You know, all of the classic Disney movies have, the Disney Renaissance movies have them. So you've got Timon and Pumbaa, you've got the crab from the mermaid thing. There's probably one of the living things in the Beauty Beast movie. In the CG era, you start with Donkey, who, you know, in the context of the rest of this world comes up as like weirdly anachronistic. And there's a lot of anachronistic stuff in Shrek in general, and that's one of the reasons why it's good. Shrek is a good movie. I don't know if anybody has ever really talked about this. This trope is fine, right? Sometimes a kid's movie, you know, you got like really dark things happening. Sometimes you want a weird little guy to do a fart joke or something, and whatever, that's fine. You gotta have comedic relief to refresh our like sensorial palette so that we're not just overwhelmed with whatever the actual plot is. It's a fine enough technique from a storytelling perspective. The problem with the wacky side characters in a post-Shrek world is that everybody wants to have their donkey who is like eminently quotable and just immediately imprints themselves onto your imagination. I don't know, as a kid when I saw Shrek in theaters, I remember feeling like it was really subversive and unlike anything I had ever seen, and specifically Donkey was like a big inflection point for that because I don't even really know why exactly. He just felt so different, just different from the rest of the movie, just even in the context of a movie about fantasy characters, because you've got like Pinocchio, you've got Robin Hood, and you've got the Gingerbread Man, and all these other characters, and then there's just a talking donkey.
I'm not talking to damn thing over saw.
Who knows things about the world that we live in. And again, there's a lot of anachronistic stuff in Shrek. And of course, that goes back to like Robin Williams in the Genie, Aladdin. I don't care about Disney movies. I don't care about they're children's movies for kids. I don't care. But specifically in the post-Shrek era, these wacky side characters, because so many of these movies, as has always been the case really with studio cinema sort of chasing on the tails of a popular film, they don't really understand why it works when it works. They're just sort of like, oh, what we need a stand-up comedian who can just improv a bunch of bad jokes while the plot sort of resets, you know? So you've got the stupid snowman in the Frozen movies. I think there's like one or two in every Pixar movie. And sometimes they're integrated well, sometimes they're not. But generally speaking, they always drive me up the wall. And this has been especially true in this recent era. I like Spider-Verse a lot, but I think that Spider-Man Noir, Penny Parker, and who's the other one? Oh, Spider-Pig. They're fun. I like their performances and what they bring to the animation, but they're such a small part of the movie that they kind of end up feeling like they detract from it. And that's always the problem with the side characters, the sort of jokey side characters, is that at their worst, they feel like they are tacked on to the point that they rob the rest of the movie of more of the stuff that really works. I like the side characters. I love the spider people. I have the original Spider-Verse comics. They're really bad, but they have some fun ideas. They either needed to have more screen time or they shouldn't have been in the movie. And as it stands, it's just an awkward amount of stuff. Their arcs are really, they're just sort of restatements of what the actual main story is. And a lot of times it's just not all that satisfying. And then you've got the bad guys, which is fantastic. I love the homoerotic tension between Mr. Wolf and Mr. Snake. Well, you know, whatever. That's me projecting onto it. It's a kid's movie for kids. It's not actually homoerotic, but I can dream, right? Like, they're furries. They're all doing stuff. Fuck, I'm talking about a children's movie. Oh, God. The thing is, I'm an adult. When I watch a children's movie, I'm like, well, I've got to find some way to enjoy this beyond just the content. So I inflect things into it. I know it's not present in the text. It just makes it more fun for me, okay? I'm not saying it's an intrinsic part of the thing. Whatever. Get off my ass. As much as I like the bad guys, I think that the piranha, spider, and shark characters, like they get some fun moments, but again, they're tacked on. They feel like they subtract from the movie, and at their worst, they dumb it down. And that's when it really sucks. The Bad Guys is weird. I haven't talked about Puss in Boots yet. The Bad Guys is weird because it has this undercurrent. Like, it's a fun sort of Lupin the Third-esque movie, but it has this undercurrent that is like deeply anime. Like there's a crater in the city from a meteor that has like psychic powers. A big part of the plot involves like a big psychic ray to control the minds of a bunch of people. And of course, it's all just, you know, guinea pigs. I don't really love the third act of that film. The whole chase sequence, there's great animation in that, and that's what's fun to watch. But the actual stakes, what it represents, it all kind of sucks, in my opinion, but it's fun to watch. What I like about a lot of anime is that it'll be like funny, silly, you know, kiddie kind of stuff, but then there will also be like weird, high concept bullshit that it complicates the setting and gives you some stuff to chew on and think about. And, you know, as a kid, what I loved about, say, The Secret of Nim is that it just has so much weird stuff. Or The Dark Crystal. There's just so much meat. There's so much like stuff, and as movies they're awkward and not always like the best, but they're different. They have stuff to like grapple onto, and I imagine you inserting one of these like wacky side characters played by a stand-up comedian into one of those, and in order to give them enough screen time to even justify their presence in the film, you would necessarily have to remove a lot of the weird sort of blind alleys in those movies that are exactly what make them so interesting. And then you have to streamline it and make it just sort of much more conventional. And that just bums me out. I like the bad guys. I like Spider-Verse. I think their side characters kind of drag down what are otherwise pretty good movies. And I think people would argue, oh, but they're kids' movies. They're kids' movies. So you've got to have wacky jokes in there. You got to have wacky side characters. Otherwise, the kids won't pay attention. Have you ever met a child? Have you ever actually talked to a child? Have you ever been a child? Do you remember watching kids shows, like things that were clearly made for kids and just felt like utterly demeaned? Because I do. I remember watching cartoons for children that weren't, a lot of the better Cartoon Network stuff that just felt like, oh, you're a child, so what you like is flashing lights and silly voices and fart jokes and physical comedy, and that's it. And whatever, that has its place. Sometimes it's fun. But the idea that you have to have really dumb, bad, detractive elements in these films because they're children's movies, once again, I think that's fundamentally devaluing the medium of cartoon movies for children. I think that a good movie for kids is just a good movie, in my opinion. It's just a good movie. It's not fundamentally different from a regular movie. And the arbitrary separation of children's media from adult media, it makes it so that both genres are sort of detracted from, where adult media isn't allowed to play with childhood as much, and children's media isn't allowed to play with darker, weirder things that are much, much more generally considered adult. So anyway, enter Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. I enjoyed it. I didn't love the intro sequence, which everybody loves. It's animated well. I thought it was just kind of boring. I don't like the musical number. I don't like that it comes up. The lyrics are really lazy. The rest of the movie redeems the introduction sequence, in my opinion, because it's a big action thing, and it's like, ooh, look how big of a hero the hero is. And then he dies and comes back, and it's his last life. He's on his last life. The whole movie, spoilers for this cartoon movie for children, the whole movie is about becoming aware of the fact that you're going to die. That's a good theme to bring up in children's cartoons, in my opinion. That's a perennial theme, and I think it's important, especially now in the age of organized abandonment, where probably at this point, 1.5 million Americans have died of COVID-19 in the last 3 years. So there's a lot of those were parents who have left children behind. So I think teaching children how to deal with death is probably a good idea, because the American empire has demonstrated pretty amply at this point that it really doesn't care who dies of anything, pretty much anything. Whether it's chemical spills from train derailments or easily preventable illnesses like COVID-19 or any medical issue. If you don't have money, you're fucked. And especially children. Children are property. We don't treat them like adults. We treat them like inheritors of our ideological perspectives and absolutely nothing else. A lot of parents treat children like they are going to grow up to be the person who takes care of them when they're in a nursing home, and that's it. And so, yeah, we demean children. I don't remember what I was saying when I went on this tear. Talking about death in honest terms is a good thing to bring up for children. I think that's a heavy thing that is worthwhile giving kids the tools to deal with. I think John Mulaney's character is like the weakest. He doesn't really do anything. It's kind of a weak performance from John Mulaney. Didn't he do some shit recently that everybody didn't like him for? Whatever. He's a stand-up comedian. Who gives a shit? The thing that really worried me after the first big encounter with the wolf, who is the embodiment of death, coming after like the Puss in Boots sitting in a bar and he fights death and he's just completely outclassed by this guy. I love a good anime fight scene there.
Slow, sloppy, yes!
He encounters death and then realizes, oh god, this is bad, and he runs off and he decides to retire. He decides to take off all of his stuff. He buries all of his things and he goes into the crazy cat lady's house and lives with a bunch of cats. And he lives there for an indeterminate amount of time, long enough to grow a beard. And in that time, he comes to befriend a dog who is pretending to be a cat named Perrito. And he is like fucked up little dog with bulgy eyes. And, he's one of the little yappy dogs that nobody likes except for the people who do like them. I was really worried when he showed up because he has all of the signs of the wacky side character. From that moment on, as he tagged along on adventures, I just kept waiting for him to have like oops, I did a poopy in front of you, and then the bad guy slips on it and falls on his bottom and everybody gets a laugh. I just kept waiting for the worst, right? But it never came. And as the movie went along, I started to realize that I kind of like Perrito. Thematically, within the movie, I think he's actually the best wacky side character that has been in an animated cartoon in ages. And this is why I wanted to make this video, because I haven't really seen anybody talk about this. I haven't looked too deep. I've read some Letterboxd reviews and kind of glanced around at some other reviews. I haven't dug into what the fandom response is. I'm sure plenty of people have made this point. I'm not claiming to be an inventive person, but I think Perrito works because he stands as a fascinating opposite to the wolf, Death. They both show up at approximately the same interval in the film, right? So Death shows up and Puss in Boots runs away and retires out of fear of his own death. And then at his lowest moment, when he's basically just given up on being a sentient cat who can talk, this little dog shows up who is really fucked up and has a really tragic backstory and is just painfully genuine and really obnoxious, and just kind of drags him kicking and screaming back into personhood. And throughout the film, Perrito, as this obnoxious, silly, wacky side character, keeps playing the perfect counterpoint to Death. When he shows up, so cool, just beautiful shapes and just so intimidating. The hype is perfectly merited. Just a really solid animated villain. In order to really sell that, in my opinion, as a writer, in order to sell a character that cool and that unstoppable, you need something equal and opposite to level it out. And I would never in my life have arrived at Perrito as an equal and opposite counterbalance to Death. But he works because he doesn't have an arc in this film. Unlike Death, who is pursuing Puss in Boots because Puss in Boots has evaded him 8 times now, and now he's come to collect. He's like, well, you've wasted all of your lives. But as the film goes on and Puss in Boots learns to live for himself, eventually Death is like, grr, I can't kill you because you're not the same guy. You're not the same boisterous person. You actually care about life. And then he turns around and walks away. Perrito doesn't have an arc. He decides that he's friends with Puss in Boots and everybody, and he just, no matter what they do to him, he just sticks around. He's annoying, and everybody thinks he's annoying, and then he stops being annoying because he's just so genuine. You realize, he actually believes it. And then you get to Perrito's backstory, and it's so unrelentingly sad, opining happily about all the times that he played hide and seek with his owners, who were clearly trying to get rid of him, to the point where they put him in a sock with some rocks and threw him into a river. That, to me, that is the definition of life, is somebody choosing to crawl out of consistent abandonment over and over and over again, and still facing the uncertainty of continuing to exist with the sense that you deserve to be here and you deserve to be happy, and fundamentally you're good and that people are good. And that is a naive perspective, but I would say that Death on the far end of that is equally naive, but it's in a cool way, in an anime way. That's why it works, because in real life, Death is so enticing. I say this as somebody who has thought about death pretty much every day of my adult life. Whenever I talk to psychiatrists, psychologists, they ask me, are you having any suicidal ideation? And I'm like, well, it depends on what you mean. Am I actually planning on killing myself? No, absolutely not. Do I think about what would happen if I died right now? Oh yeah, every second of every day. Of course I do. There is this allure to death. There is this poetry to it. It's just something it's grim and fucked up, and it happens to everybody, and it's just so it's so easy to get fixated on. And that's the whole point of the movie, right? Is that Puss in Boots gets fixated on death to the point where every time he shows up, he has this wretched panic attack. Life, on the other hand, is obnoxious because you got to get out of bed every single day. You got to brush your teeth. You got to eat food. You gotta do stuff. You gotta do stuff all the fucking time. You gotta do stuff every single day. It sucks. It's boring. But you do it anyway, and sometimes you feel good. Sometimes you feel really, really bad, but sometimes you feel really, really good. It makes sense to me that in this film, Perrito doesn't have an arc and it just kind of continues being their friend, because you can stand on a ledge and contemplate suicide, and that's a binary choice. You are either accepting or rejecting death. But when you reject death, if you don't then turn around and find something in life that carries you forward, you don't really escape that desire to end it all. Life and living is a thing that you do every single day. That choice is a choice that never stops being made. You make it every single second. There is no story to it. There is no drama to it. It just is. And sometimes bad things happen, and either they kill you or they don't, and you get up and you move on regardless of how you feel about it. Like, it's just so conspicuous to me that at the start, you know, Puss in Boots and the Whisper cat, Whisker, what's her name? The other cat, the lady cat, the romance interest cat. They both have their own moments of like, oh, who's this idiot? I'm gonna con him. I'm gonna con him out of everything. And then every time they do that, Perrito's just like, okay, haha, and then just doesn't. He's just so genuine and so unflappable that they just realize like, oh wait, no, he's not. He actually means it, and he doesn't know any better, and now I want to protect him because he's so precious and so innocent, despite everything that's happened to him. And that, to me, that's sort of the defining thing. That's what makes the arc of the film work, because it's not just that Puss in Boots gets over his fear of death, it's that he finds something to live for. Especially with the Goldilocks and the Three Bears. I like their story too. And the cricket. I didn't like John Mulaney's character or his performance very much, but the cricket is awesome, and that like back and forth between, you know, trying to find a conscience with this guy. Actually, now that I think about it, I do like that character because he is so clearly a parallel to Wilson Fisk in Spider-Verse, except in Spider-Verse, Fisk, what he's trying to do is the same thing that everybody in every multiverse movie is trying to do, which is bring his dead family back to life. And the moral of the movie ultimately is, no, you're not allowed to do that. Actually, you're not allowed to ever want things to be different or to be angry about things that were taken away from you. Just accept that things die and that bad things happen to good people, and there's nothing you can do about it, and you can't change the status quo. I think that in a world where you have characters with superheroic powers and you have this construct of the multiverse and everything, it's kind of cowardly to then turn around and say, oh, but our mortal status quo based on our own realistic limitations in the real world, that is the thing that we must always reinforce in these fantasy settings. And that's why Marvel movies are all bad, because they refuse to take their fantasy elements seriously. They don't take them as elements of world building. They're just aesthetics. They're just aesthetics that justify them continuously reifying the status quo in favor of the American empire. Whereas here, with the Blueberry Thumb Boy by John Mulaney, he's clearly, like, in silhouette, he's a parallel to Wilson Fisk, but his goal is not to bring back his dead family with the last wish that can grant him anything. His goal is to just become so powerful that he can do anything, anywhere, for any reason whatsoever. Basically, he wants to become Lord English from Homestuck. That is so much more honest about the bad people in the world who are trying to do bad. And it's even better that the film's conclusion, especially from the Jimmy Stewart, Jiminy Cricket character, who is like the conscience.
You're not gonna shoot a puppy, are you, Jack?
Yeah, in the face.
Even this character is like, no, this guy needs to die.
You're horrible.
What took you so long, idiot?
And I think that's good. I think it's good when a movie takes a hardline stance and says, you know what? Maybe at the point where an adult human being has led their life to an end point where they are on a power-mad quest for infinite ability to oppress human beings, that there's no conversation you can have with them that's going to turn them around, and that probably they need to be executed. And I think that's great. I like that part. And then the Goldilocks story is about appreciating the family that you have rather than the family that you always imagined you would have, which is like, it's sort of a found family story, but it's a very different angle on the found family story. And I think it's interesting how this movie feels in comparison with the original Shrek, which, like I said, when I saw it in theaters as a kid, it felt transgressive in a way that is impossible to imagine now because it so thoroughly overtook the mainstream that it set the mold for like every CG animated movie to come out since then. But at the time, it felt like it was breaking onto sacred ground and like making fun of it, taking the piss out of it, and that was great. And then of course it became the status quo. So this movie takes so many, like, it feels so much like the first Shrek in the sense that there are all of these like fantasy characters. It's taking the same kind of conceit very seriously with all of these fantasy characters existing in the same universe, but it also takes their emotional stakes and their like existential stakes very seriously. It feels like a real proper sequel to Shrek in a way that none of the other Shrek sequels felt, because it's sort of like what Tim Rogers says about Pac-Man and its sequels. Like, what can possibly stand as Pac-Man 2 but a game that is just as disruptive and strange as Pac-Man, but completely unidentifiable as Pac-Man. It's definitely not as like revolutionary as Shrek was. It's not going to change the shape of animated films for children for the foreseeable future. But I think it's a really solid intervention on the formula that isn't that bad, isn't a waste of your time. It's a pretty fun little movie. I would give it an 8 out of 10. Really solid film, more or less. It's got some stuff in it some of the big gunk that I really don't like, but it has less of it than a lot of these movies do. I really appreciate how a lot of kids movies now, or at least the popular ones, are sort of trying to scrub away a lot of that old school DreamWorks gunk. Is that all I had to say about Puss in Boots? I think that's all I had to say about Puss in Boots. So yeah, you just watched a YouTube video about Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, an animated movie for children. Here are some names of people who gave me money on some websites. Brandy KL Prime, Patrick Feeney, SNR Jackdaw, Emma Sylvia, Evan Ritchie, Bobby Jane DeForge, Pinball Witch, J MacD, Natalie Watts, Anaphylaxis, Athiet, JB Silbinary Wolf, Bellicose, Anarcho Duck, Azriel Suzy Miniike, Kaylin Hoover, Zach Clue, Richard Dunbeck, Halsey, Dick Beninia, Quirk, Z, Optimistic Duelist, Cam Chacon, Jane the Human, Catherine Jibes, Robin, Rubeline, Scott Olson, Prum, Jay Jorts, Chthonic Syzygies, Kate Shrike, Vriskazone, The Girls, Now I Only Want to Triumph, Apocalypse Arisen, and Dyke Doll. So thank you for watching this YouTube video about an animated movie for children. I've been Sarah Zedek. My pronouns have been she, her. You can find me on Twitter at HMSNoFun. You can find me on Shrike Club at Sarah Zedek at Shrike.club. That's Mastodon that you can find me on. Patreon.com/LTAS, camaraderie.co/Sarah Zedek. One-time donations, ko-fi.com/Sarah Zedek. Yeah, I'm also on co-host in some other places. Look in the description. Watch my other YouTube videos. I did a video about Tunic that is an hour and 20 minutes. That's a really solid analysis of it. I put a lot of work into it. I'm really proud of that script. It's a good YouTube video. You should go watch that one. I did some more recent things also, but I won't talk about them because I've already talked about them because they're on my YouTube channel. Did you know that you can click to other places on a YouTube video? Like, there's a description below, and there's like links, and there's just all sorts of stuff that you can do on YouTube. It's pretty amazing what you can do with technology these days. HTML, man. What will they think of next?